Hello, everyone. Let's welcome our guest today. Sarah Ticho is working on a fascinating intersection of art, health, and immersive technologies. Her goal is to improve physical and mental health through immersive tech. She's the founder of Hatsumi, and I'm sure you'll explain to us what it means. And one of the projects that they developed is called Body Map. It's a tool to help people communicate and understand the embodied experience of pain and emotion using 3D drawing and sound. Sarah is also a producer in Explore Deep, which is an award-winning, clinically validated, breathing-controlled VR experience designed to reduce anxiety. Welcome, Sarah, and we're so glad to have you here and looking forward to your talk.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor to be invited to talk about what I do, and also a nice opportunity to re-examine what I'm doing and why as well. Really appreciate the invitation. So hi everyone, nice to meet you, and I had a lovely introduction already. I'm a producer and curator and founder of a company. I wear lots of hats and try and give myself some sort of label to make sense of what I'm doing. But all of this was sort of accidental, I guess. Basically, what I'm going to be presenting today was actually a proposed PhD that I'd put together. And then after not getting into a couple of universities, I decided to do this as something distinct that was, I guess, a company that combines art, research, and healthcare as well. I'm also an end of life doula as well, and so I think doing this work in the intersection of sort of health and arts, I've been really interested in more holistic ways that we talk about grief and health conditions, and so I've been training to do that the last few years as well. So today I'm going to be talking to you about Body Map and the work that we've been doing through investigating sensory realities through immersive art. And just as a bit of context as well, so our organisation name is Hatsumi, which is a play on a Japanese word called Hatsumimi, which means to hear something for the first time. And what we're really interested in is being able to help people see things for the first time and how we can use immersive art and things like 3D drawing to make invisible experiences visible. So I studied anthropology at university. I did biological and social anthropology at the University of Kent here in the UK, and didn't really have any interest in the arts. I studied in Japan as for an exchange year, and enjoyed engaging in sort of all the fun cultural activities there. But it wasn't until I graduated that I got really interested in contemporary art. And here in Brighton is a really fantastic arts organisation called Fabrica. And it's an arts organisation housed inside a former Regency church. And I started volunteering there around the time that my dad had just passed away. And I think that combination of graduating university, trying to decide who you want to be and what you want to do for the rest of your life, or putting pressure on yourself to make those decisions, and facing like a really profound form of grief, I felt very lost. And it was a friend who was, his mum was actually the director here and suggested volunteering. And it was sort of spending time in this immersive art experience, essentially, and being able to have conversations with the public about what this meant to them, and hearing the artists talk about how this was like a representation of collective grief, that I think really got me interested in the arts as a therapeutic tool, or something that isn't just this inaccessible concept for other people, but a way of getting people to talk about really difficult experiences. And I loved the way that as volunteers, we were all invited to be a part of it as well. So we met the artist, we heard about her process, and then we all contributed our shirts to this experience, or this artwork. And you could touch it and play around with it, and you could, run through them all and see them all swaying side to side. And I just remember this child running through, and his dad just enjoying watching them, just playing with it, and just how that feeling of being immersed in something really changes the way that you interact with art. And so I think that sort of started my career working in the arts for some time after that. And so a few years later, I ended up working in a contemporary arts organisation, and started working in film as well. And it was around that time that I really wanted to become a filmmaker. And I think that's because I really wanted to learn about my own experience and think about how I communicate that with other people. And I really love this quote of that one of the functions of art is to give people the words to know their own experience, and that storytelling is a tool for knowing who we are and what we want. But it was around that time that I also became quite unwell, and I ended up getting diagnosed with mania with psychotic symptoms. And it was actually the time that I ended up sitting in a doctor's office opposite a psychologist that was offering me antipsychotics, that I just felt like I wasn't empowered. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted, and I felt really scared, and I did not have the words to articulate my experience. And I just remember feeling like this data point kind of moving through the health system. I got handed a code, which was like the code for my condition that I'd been given. And it was a really, really frightening time. And I think that's when I got really interested in the arts as a tool for how we can talk about lived experience. But it was through this process that I got really interested in researching, like, how do we talk about the things that we're going through? And apparently, on average, we have about 11 seconds to convey our condition to a doctor before we're likely to be interrupted. And all of those experiences that have led to that moment, to try and fit that into a couple of sentences is really hard. And especially with things like pain or mental health conditions that are so difficult to describe, like you're asked to kind of describe it in this sort of very formulaic, quantitative way. You know, how much pain do you feel on a level of 1 to 10? Like, how depressed or suicidal do you feel? And that's really like not a very efficient way or a useful way of being able to understand people's experiences. And not only that, that we have all these like limitations by our language. Like, how do we talk about the different types of anxiety or depression, or these extraordinary experiences that we can have day to day? What if English isn't your first language? There's that limit there as well. The fact that we have this limitation of time, that you're anxious as well, that people are staring at you and you're just, you're out of your comfort zone. We often struggle to understand what's happening in our bodies as well. And this is something called interoceptive awareness, which I'll talk a little bit about later as well. And then, of course, like age, like when you're younger, then you struggle even more to talk about what's going on because you haven't had that time to develop experience and to understand yourself. And perhaps you have a partner or a carer or a parent that's speaking on your behalf and is kind of acting as the translator there. And so we really need to think about how we actually do describe our experience between patients and doctors, because one of the biggest causes of medical errors is down to miscommunication. And so that's where this sort of journey for me began. And so, having worked in the arts and storytelling, I became really interested in how we can use a combination of technology and storytelling to understand lived experience. So it was about a year after that initial episode, and I was feeling much better in myself, and I decided to move to Australia, where I worked at TEDx Sydney, and it was there that I first heard a talk about someone talking about the different ways that using VR could help you understand yourself in a different way, and that's what really began this journey for me. And I became really fascinated by projects like Be Another Lab, or a project called A Machine to Be Another by Be Another Lab, which, if you haven't come across it before, is this kind of really fascinating body swapping experiment where one person had a camera on their head and that image was being live streamed into this headset, and that the actor would sort of mimic the body movement of the other person, and that you could feel that sort of sense of embodiment of what it's like to be somebody else. And I'm sure if you're not already familiar, the work of Mel Slater and understanding the sort of body illusion is really, really fascinating. And so I was thinking, could I do some sort of experience about psychosis? And I became really fascinated in VR as a metaphor for talking about psychosis. This kind of, I just remember really vividly this feeling of sort of knowing that there was this objective reality still, but what I was seeing and believing is so different. And the same as when you're wearing a VR headset, you can feel the table in front of you and the chair beneath you, that everything I was seeing and believing felt so unbelievably different. And so I started to look at other ways that people were telling stories out there as well. And this was around the time that a really fantastic 360 experience came out, and it was the first VR experience I tried that really made me cry. And it was this kind of ability to do multi-perspective storytelling, and Rose Trosh is the director behind it. And they brought it to Sundance in 2015, and they would tell stories from a range of different people's perspectives. So this one was a two-person perspective story, The Party, and it was the story of a young girl at a party who gets increasingly drunk over the course of the evening and ends up being sexually assaulted by this guy at the party. And then you see the story playing out from his perspective as well. And it was so fascinating seeing how his friends were like normalizing these behaviors, and just how two people can see an event unfold from such different ways, and how you can use that as a tool to develop empathy towards a range of different lived experiences and understanding the motivations behind the way that people behave. And so I started to research this more and more, and it was around that time as well that a really fantastic VR experience came out that was an accompaniment to a film as well, which I really recommend, called Notes on Blindness. And so this was a film that's a kind of fascinating documentary fiction fusion, and it was based on the audio diaries of a theologian called John Hull, who started to go blind. And so he kept these diaries as a way of making sense of his experience. And so the feature film itself is actors lip syncing along to those diaries and sort of talking about his experience. But the accompanying VR project, Into Darkness, was visualizing what it's like to be blind. And so as you go through the experience, you can only see what you can hear. And I love that idea that virtual reality is this ability to has this ability to visualize things that we couldn't see. And other projects by Marshmallow Laser Feast are again a really interesting example of artists working with scientists to visualize the experience of being a butterfly or a frog, and how different animals can see the world differently. And I think that ability to just completely change your perspective on the world can be really powerful. And again, other projects that have been used in the more therapeutic and research space I think are fascinating. Mel Slater and his group at Virtual Body Works made a project called Freud Me a few years ago, which has also now been changed to Conver Self. And so the idea is that you are standing in a VR experience opposite Sigmund Freud, and you're invited to tell him all of your problems and what's going on in your life. And then suddenly you swap bodies and you are embodied in Freud, hearing yourself telling you your problems. And I remember when I was really young, I used to write diaries in third person, because I always found it so much easier to tell other people how to deal with their problems than to deal with mine. And again, it's this ability to almost other yourself. So you're there listening to yourself, telling you your problems, giving yourself advice back, and then you swap bodies again, and you're back in your body hearing you as Freud giving you advice. And it was really interesting, again, how it was used as a tool to sort of self-counsel, and that it really sort of changed the way people perceived their problems afterwards. And again, I think that's such an interesting and exciting affordance of VR, that you can embody other people, but you can also disembody from yourself and see yourself from a very different perspective as well. And so when I was out in Australia, then I ended up becoming a curator at something called the Big Anxiety Festival, which was an arts and health festival run by the University of New South Wales. And it was when I was there that I was thinking about doing a PhD there about visualizing the experience of psychosis. And I ended up meeting a really interesting researcher there called Catherine Boydell, who introduced me to this fascinating arts and health research method called body mapping. So body mapping has existed since about the 80s, and it's been used in a range of different environments and applied to all sorts of conditions. And it's really asking people to think about how they experience their bodies in a different way. So traditionally what you do is you get a large piece of paper and you trace around your body, and then you go through a mindfulness experience and you start to think, how does my body feel right now? Or how does it feel when I'm anxious? Like, where do I feel that in my body, and what sort of colors or textures or words do I associate with that? And you start to build up an artwork, essentially, that sort of non-verbally communicates that experience as well. Here's also a nice picture of, in the top right, of doing some body mapping as well at Fabrica a few years ago. So it was nice to be able to kind of start that journey and then go back as well and do some stuff there.
Well, body mapping is an arts-based technique. It's one of many genres that we've been using in our research. And it really refers to creation of life-size body maps depicting, in our case, experience of an illness, experience of an intervention, and really getting people to think about how they feel about a particular phenomena using visual symbols and slogans. And body mapping actually started about a couple of decades ago in Africa to depict experiences of people with HIV/AIDS, and it was really a community development project. We also see the body maps as a dissemination event. So how can we share those body maps with different audiences to communicate that key finding with respect to whatever phenomena we're studying? One of the things that helps with anxiety is being able to talk about it, understanding that you're not alone in that experience, and sharing coping strategies. So again, hoping that this can be a way to enhance the conversation or increase the conversation.
So with body mapping, I did the workshop and I felt very unsatisfied with my body map. And I had been an arts producer, but not an artist, or hadn't identified myself as an artist at that point. And having been really interested in virtual reality and trying all sorts of 3D drawing experiences like Tilt Brush, I became really interested in how could translating this into a VR experience make this more interesting or useful, and how would that totally transform that? Because I think one of the most powerful experiences for me trying VR for the first time was being able to try things like Tilt Brush and being able to float through space and paint with fire, and how compelling and wonderful that felt. And yeah, became really interested in that sort of process. So this was an actual prototype that somebody called Lisa from New Path VR did a few years ago, where she tried it out in Tilt Brush and did a body map a day in Tilt Brush and as part of the prototyping process. And so what I've been doing over the last few years is thinking like, well, where can this actually be used? And what is the value of translating body mapping into a virtual reality experience? And so I've been looking at how this can be a tool in health, being able to communicate health conditions, especially pain and mental health, how it can be used as a public engagement tool to start a conversation with the public about invisible experiences and how we all may be similar or different, and also how it can be a research tool as well, and how we can actually use this as a way of understanding the variety of ways that people experience their bodies around the world. And I think that some of the core affordances of being able to translate this into a virtual reality experience is this ability to really focus and take people away from that waiting room or the doctor's office, and that you can find this real peace and solitude within a virtual environment, that you can be somewhere that is calming and getting somebody into a mindset where you're asking them to do quite a complex task of thinking about how they experience their bodies, but also kind of having this almost synesthesia-like experience where you're translating a sensation into a color and a texture that you've not really considered before. That it is a far more embodied experience, and you're using your body to sort of create this artwork as well. And what we've been doing is working with artists to co-create a series of animated and adaptive drawing tools, but also integrating things like audio as well, so that you can actually paint with sound as well and create this sort of additional layer of kind of collage as well. And that also by doing it in a virtual environment, you can actually spatialize your artworks much more. And not only can you draw on the skin, but you can draw inside the body and outside the body as well. And I'll talk a little bit later as well about how people have done that too. And then also just being able to digitize it and save it. I think there's real value in that as well, because when we did all the different workshops over in Australia and the workshops I've done since with paper body mapping, like people want to take that home, and it's so brilliant seeing all those images all together, but being able to digitize them and save them and archive them, I think there's real possibility to, you know, track your different experiences over time as well. And so I guess what we're kind of situating ourselves between the sort of more qualitative ability to show different experiences, but also how we can potentially quantify experience as well. And by being able to digitize it, we can do really interesting stuff around analyzing it and integrating things like AI and machine learning to observe trends in how people might visualize their experience, looking at the different colors that people might use or textures. But also what we've been doing as well is looking at how we can sort of merge that with those more sort of quantitative surveys of how much pain are you feeling between 1 and 10, and then cross-referencing that with the artworks that people have made as well. And so I'm not the first to look at how the arts can be used in understanding different experiences. And I think that pain especially is a really interesting area to explore. Because first of all, it's a huge problem. I think about 42% of the global population will experience some form of chronic pain at some point, which is just a huge number. And it really does, you know, completely interrupt people's lives. And there's this real misunderstanding that it's just a medical problem, when it's really a much more, I think we need a much more holistic understanding of how people experience their bodies and how experiences can end up leading to pain as well. And so this was a project done by, it was a collaboration between an artist and researcher here in the UK, UCL, where an artist called Deborah Padfield worked with patients with chronic pain to create these series of cards that were expressive of different types of pain. And then they used them within doctors' consultations to explore how this could improve patient-doctor communication. And they found that patients were more likely to speak more about their experience, but also to talk about the emotional impact of their pain, or how they had experienced emotions in their body and in the past as well, and how that was such a huge influence on their sort of day-to-day living as well. And the understanding sort of meaning behind it has real value. And then on the more clinical side as well, there's been other research in how pain drawings can improve sort of patient-doctor communication as well. And that this sort of app was really useful in some contexts too. But I think just it helped doctors understand the differences between their conceptions of pain. But I think what we're really interested in is actually creating that more detail than just saying it's here, and that having that artwork available it's more about that conversation afterwards, a bit like standing in the gallery, like I mentioned earlier, that it's really about saying, all right, you've done this artwork, now can you explain what this means to you? Why have you chosen purple or fizzing or electricity? And being able to have that much more sort of detailed description as well. So these are some of the areas that we've started to look at and bringing it to now, and we're starting to do some early pilots with a few different places. We're looking at how we can use VR for pre-consultation, so inviting people to do it in the waiting room, or having some space put to them, so that they're actually thinking about their experience and what they want to communicate before they go into the room to talk to the doctor, or even being able to do it at home when they have the sort of time and space to really think about what's going on with them. Because it really varies over time, doesn't it? And I don't know about you, but I've had moments in the past where I've been like feeling really unwell, and then there's something about the day that you go to the doctor where you feel better, and you have to sort of remember back to what that ongoing experience has been. There's also been interest from surgeons that want to really quickly understand how patients are feeling post-surgery as well, and sort of find out if something different or unexpected has come up, and that they want that really quick snapshot of, are you okay, what's going on, in a way that isn't just describing on a scale of 1 to 10. And we've also had interest from anesthesiologists as well, that want to monitor how different drugs or therapies might be affecting patients. And then also there's been a real interest from chronic pain nurses and consultants as well, looking at how things might change over time for patients as well. Because often there's this thing where you feel like very stuck and you think this is how it always is every day. But actually, when you can look back on this visual journal and you can see how things might vary, but also reminding you that these things can change and aren't always consistent, can be really helpful too. Virtual reality has also been used a little bit in art therapy as well. And again, there's some early research about how this could really enhance the experience and the ability of art therapists as well. So again, this sort of ability to have a virtual environment that you can change and have all these different colors and textures, that you have all these different virtual materials and these sort of unreal characteristics is how they describe it, where you can have animated tools and integrate audio and all sorts of things. And this image in the background as well, this is actually one of the first prototypes that we developed in Unity. And this is actually a sound designer talking about the experience of making music. And as you can see, then it's really interesting how this person hasn't actually just illustrated inside the body. And he sort of described afterwards how this sort of connection with the outside world of trying something new, hearing it back, and then that sort of, iterative process of creating something. And then he talked about like the chills he gets on his arms when he feels like he gets it right. And yeah, it was just really fascinating, like having known this person for some time, of seeing that, and I was like, oh, I can totally understand that, which made me see it in a very different way. And also one of the things that we're really exploring here is not just the ability to communicate to others how we're feeling, but also find ways to better communicate our experiences to ourselves as well. And this is where things like journaling can have real value as well, because you're reflecting on your experience and able to almost articulate the different types of experience you can have. And it's almost like being a sommelier of your own emotions. And there's some really fantastic research by people like Lisa Feldman Barrett. She writes a really great book called How Emotions Are Made that I'd really recommend. And they found that people that have this ability to more eloquently articulate the different types of emotional experiences they're having are less likely to go to the doctor or use medication as much and spend fewer days hospitalized for illness. And that these people are much better at being able to self-regulate their emotions and sort of identify what's going on and respond to it in a way that may be sort of better for their long-term well-being as well. And it's been really interesting, this process of just being able to try out the sort of early body mapping tool with loads of different people, just to think about how this could be used and the different emotional experiences that people could apply it to, and how it can get people to talk about a whole range of experiences. I'm really enthusiastic about how it can be applied in health, but I think ultimately this is just an experience visualization tool. And not being a healthcare professional, I was also quite nervous about getting people to talk about difficult experiences, which is why I asked the sound designer to illustrate the feeling of making music. And in the bottom left, that's somebody telling their partner that they love them for the first time. And again, afterwards, he was sort of like explaining it more. And he was like, can you make the tools bigger? I really want to draw this feeling coming out of my chest more. And was sort of explaining how he just really wanted to, he felt so connected to that person, and that he felt like they were in this sort of shared space together. But he was very nervous. And so that's why he had really red cheeks. And then he had, what's the word? Forgotten the word. Pins and needles in his fingers and toes, and that kind of build up to that moment, but then just feeling really accepted by that person and felt really lovely as well. So yeah, very, very basic version. And as you can see, there's been some iterations as well in the representation of the body. I think it's really interesting when you look at, free online archives of, different avatars and things that are available, that there's not great selections out there, and that a lot of them are very muscular men or hypersexualized women. And what we found is that in some early prototyping we did as well, we actually took some 3D scans of ourselves and put them in, and that just didn't work at all. It was very, very weird. And you're more distracted by looking at yourself than really thinking about your own embodied experience. And that you obviously want it to reflect your dimensions a bit. So we have it scaled to your height. But aside from that, you kind of just want this relatively androgynous blob, because the focus should be on thinking about how you're translating that experience rather than, does this look exactly like me? The bottom right image is someone drawing a dream. And then the top left is an artist talking about anxiety as well. And this was, again, with like very basic functionality of just having solid drawing tools. And then that sort of white moving line was an early test. We were like, oh, we'll upgrade that and make it much more detailed and interesting. And I think just through testing it out with people, loads of people really resonated with that and have used it to explain all sorts of feelings, from thoughts to sensations or making music. And so, yeah, that process of just trying out early prototypes with people, I think, can be really, really helpful as well. Again, another person that I tested it with was somebody with quite severe body dysmorphia. And again, I went through that process of, let's talk about a positive experience. And, you know, can you think of a good moment that had happened recently? And they really struggled to think of something to begin with. And we went through this onboarding process a couple of times, you know, taking a deep breath, doing a body scan, reflecting on a positive experience. And eventually they drew this image on the left. And you can't quite see from this angle, but in that image, none of that is inside them at all. All of these sort of like flying dots and those colors are completely external. And then they said, I'd really like to draw my body dysmorphia now. And I think seeing them side by side is really quite fascinating and shocking, actually, to see how different two experiences by one person can be. And they talked about how much anxiety they have, like going outside and worrying about being seen. They'd scribbled out their face because they don't want to be looked at, that they have a lot of like stomach issues because of their anxiety. And then those red arrows, so that feeling of being watched all the time as well. And I think that ability to see someone in a different way, and I'd known this person for 15, 20 years now, we'd grown up together, and I'd never understood that person's experience in the way that I did seeing this and then having that conversation with them as well. So I think there's real opportunity in that ability to journal, but also to label what those experiences are and think about how they compare. And then it started this different conversation as well of like, how do we change this? How do we redraw these inner maps? How do we take that feeling of joy that seems external and make it part of us? And that's something that I'm really interested in researching long term as well, of rewriting these embodied stories that we create for ourselves. And if you're interested in learning more about this, I really recommend this book, The Body Keeps the Score. I've been rereading all day as well. And this researcher, Bessel van der Kolk, talks so much about embodiment. And I think as somebody working in VR, like, it's so relevant to all the stuff that we're doing about how we explore and express ourselves. But he writes in this book that perceiving these visceral sensations is the very foundation of emotional awareness. And by being able to get in touch with ourselves and really viscerally connecting with who we are, we can regain that sense of self and our priorities and values. And being able to distinguish between all these selves that we experience can be really useful as well. Another example of how we've used it as well, so this was in a hospital setting on one of the Channel Islands. I went to Guernsey, not to be confused with their neighbours Jersey, which I have since learned. But this was a patient that had been seeing his consultant pain nurse for about 4 years at this point. And we were doing some VR in the hospital, and he asked if he could try this out. And so here, what he's done is he's drawn his pain that he's been experiencing for the last 4 years. And he used this color coding process where he used the orange to explain the more sort of permanent, persistent pain that he experiences. and then used the purple to explain a bit more of like a more tickly pain as well. And what was also really interesting about this person was that he usually cannot stand up without being supported. So he'll usually be leaning against a wall, or if he is standing up, usually then he will physically hold on to his left side. And I'm really fascinated by the ways that VR is used in pain management and physiotherapy. And it was so interesting to see that as soon as he put the headset on, he stops holding onto his side, and he explained that he didn't feel that pain in that moment. And being able to have that distance from it enabled him to think differently about it and how he expressed it. But what happened here is that, yeah, he was distinguishing between this purple tickly pain and the more persistent orange pain. But then he drew the pain in his head, and again started talking, like what I explained a little bit earlier, about how there's the physical sensations that he often experiences, but also the emotional impact as well, and how it had been affecting him in his life. And this ended up leading to a new diagnosis where he got referred on to a psychologist to support him with that. But this was the beginning of a sort of new phase of our research as well, because his consultant nurse felt that she could show that to another pain consultant and they could probably tell you what that is, which is how we've started this research and how we can actually use this body mapping tool as a research tool. So essentially at this point, we'd sort of bootstrapped everything. I'd found a couple of developers to collaborate with, and was just applying for funding like crazy. And then I think this time last year, I got accepted onto a program here in the UK called Creative XR, which is a program run by the Arts Council in the UK and Digital Catapult. And we almost got to be a sort of Trojan horse where we were like, we're making an arts-based project alongside all these theatre directors that are also on the programme, but also we're really thinking about health as well. And what we decided to do was to recreate this as a WebVR tool and something that could be available to use on the web. And this came about because I think there's a real lack of distribution opportunities for working in healthcare and VR. Organizations, most VR distribution organizations, not to name them specifically, are very risk adverse when it comes to healthcare. And just thinking about having to sideload things on feels very problematic. And also thinking about security and how if we are going to start saving down very personal information about people, like having to work with sort of third parties and not having control of that felt very important to us. And so we worked with a really fantastic developer called Ed Silverton, who's also based down here in Brighton, and we recreated it as a WebVR tool so that you can just go to the website on your Oculus Quest browser even, put in the password and you're good to go. And through that process, we also worked with a range of people to think about how we were going to recreate all the different tools and all the different drawing tools and rethink the environment as well. And through this, it's been so fascinating seeing all the different ways that artists may think about how they would want to express their own experiences. This is a fantastic artist called Mirabelle Jones, who used to be part of Meow Wolf and is an amazing researcher based over in Copenhagen now. So being able to see other people's interpretations of how they would do body maps and thinking about how we translate that into a VR experience was really useful. And we also did a series of co-design workshops with patients with chronic pain as well, and created a series of drawing tools, which I'll show you in a second. And it was kind of interesting as well, thinking about how do we sit in this map of people, like if we're not solely an academic endeavour, like where do we sit in this sort of landscape? And I just wanted to also point out the fact that there are loads of really fascinating organisations doing work in this space, from people like Achille and Applied VR that are looking at VR applications specifically for pain management, organisations like Headspace as well, which obviously aren't VR, but I think thinking about being able to have tools that are available every day to get people to start thinking about their emotional experience, and also where thoughts go. I hope lots of you have tried this, but I think it's I feel like it's a sort of cousin of Hatsumi in some ways, of this sort of storytelling experience where people can share their own stories through these virtual environments and seeing them all come together. And also groups like Sound Self as well, and Robin Arnott is doing some really fascinating work about the sort of technodelic revolution and how VR can be used as a tool for creating psychedelic experiences or an aid alongside psychedelic experiences, and how that can be used for people dealing with pain and addiction and all sorts of other experiences. And then, of course, there's things like Tiltbrush as well, which have been a big inspiration for this too. And so this is sort of peek into some of the tools that we'd recreated for the WebVR experience. And it's obviously that some limitations of doing things in a WebVR context, but I think it was also really helpful to think about how we can make this accessible to as many people as possible. And I'm happy to share the link with everyone afterwards if you'd like to have a go as well. And also what we did as well within this is we started to integrate sort of AI and machine learning, as I'd mentioned before. So we worked with, again, another local developer and researcher, Esin Yavuz, from an organisation called Synapse. And what we started to do was look at how we could actually use this as a way of being able to understand how people visualise lived experience as well. And could this be used potentially as an aid for diagnosing conditions in the future, or looking at trends in how people are visualizing their experience? And this is something that I've really wanted to look at for some time. A few years ago, I was working as a researcher at Stanford, and we did a project, and there's a fantastic researcher there who was looking at the cross-cultural sensory experience of communicating with God. She's called Tanya Lerman, and she's part of the anthropology department. And what they did is they went around the world and asked people, like, have you met God? And what did that feel like? What did that look like? What did that taste like or sound like? And started to look at the variety of ways that people would describe these sort of sensory experiences. And they started to find real trends in how that was sort of manifesting, and that people in Ghana had more of an auditory experience rather than in Thailand. It was much more visual. And so I'm really inspired by that, of like, how can we use things like body mapping to understand the different ways that we all might describe common experiences? Do women in Vanuatu draw anxiety in the same way that men might in Washington? And how can we use this not just to try and fit people into different boxes, but also understand the kind of amazing and diverse ways that we experience our bodies, and how does language or culture really influence that? And so what we're also preparing to do is work with cultural institutions to run installations that can work both as artworks, but also as research tools as well, where we can understand these different things. And that we can, for example, create a tag. So someone has drawn anxiety, we can gather that sort of quantitative data on how anxious they feel on a scale of 1 to 10. And then we have this sort of 3D drawing data, and the sort of accumulation can give us new insights as well. And so that's sort of where we've gotten to at the moment. I guess our next stage as well is that we're also really interested in looking at, again, how we can sort of reconstruct and rewrite and even dance with our inner maps as well. So we've just started a collaboration with Monabanda and Immersive, who are some creative studios over in the Netherlands. And we're going to be creating this new project where people are able to dance and move with their artworks as well, and think about how that can really change our relationship with these different emotions and experiences that we have. And then also, I'm really excited by the ways that they can all come together as well. And one of the real ambitions is how we can bring all these illustrations together to create almost a terracotta army of lived experience, of anxiety or love or the feeling of making music. And I really love this quote from Alain de Botton that says that art that starts by seeming alien to us is valuable because it presents us with ideas and attitudes that are not readily available in our familiar environments, and that we need in order to accede to a full engagement in our humanity. And I think through bringing this alien concept of visualizing these invisible experiences, that there's real opportunity to see each other in different ways be that in a medical context or by sharing it with your friends and family or seeing the artworks of strangers as well. And I think also, badly positioned image, but also I think in just like knowing that we're not alone and that everyone feels these feelings as well. And I think there's real value in that too. So thank you. I think that's everything from me. And then here's just a little quote as well that is really kind of hammers home for me. I think the importance of being able to combine these sort of science and art to make that information and knowledge available to people as well. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the wonderful talk and for coming over. Thanks, everyone.